Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM KFYO. Joining me on the phones right now, live from Washington, D.C., the Honorable Senator from Texas, John Cornyn. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Chad. Good to be with you on this historic day.
Well, it is a historic day. It's a day where you would hope for unity. Of course, we're not completely seeing that, but set the stage for us in Washington and what you're anticipating for today.
Well, it's pretty clear that the voters wanted a change in direction for the country, and they certainly gave us an unconventional president, but one that I am very excited about because I don't think he's going to be constrained by the typical sort of ideological arguments that seem to tie Washington in knots. And I think as a businessman, he's used to surrounding himself with talented people, which he has in his cabinet picks and the vice president, and finding solutions to problems and moving things forward. So I really do believe that's what people wanted in this election, and it's going to be quite a ride.
What have the last 24 hours been like in Washington, D.C., and for yourself?
Well, primarily what we're working on in the Senate is what one of my colleagues likes to call the personnel business. We have the responsibility to provide advice and consent or confirm the president's cabinet nominees. And so, of course, I've been participating in hearings with Jeff Sessions as the next Attorney General, Steve Mnuchin, who's the Treasury Secretary designee. Yesterday I had the opportunity to introduce to the Energy Committee Governor Rick Perry, who's going to be the next Secretary of Energy. And, of course, we have another Texan who's been nominated for Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. So that's primarily what I've been doing and what the Senate's been doing these past couple weeks. But the next order of business is to keep the promise we made to the American people to repeal and replace Obamacare. And we've taken the first step to do that. And I look forward to providing people more affordable health care that they choose for themselves rather than have it shoved down their throat by the federal government.
Senator, I brought up unity earlier when I first brought you on, and as you know, on the House side, no, I don't believe anyone on any Democrats on the Senate side, but on the House side, you have 65 or so Democrats who are refusing to show up to today's inauguration. What signals does that send within Congress and within, between Democrats and Republicans and trying to work together to better this country?
Well, it doesn't help. And I'll have to tell you, Chad, I mean, this is a tough election, as all elections are, and not everybody gets to win. You have a winner and a loser. But there's no dishonor in actually losing an election, but I think there is dishonor in the way you conduct yourself afterwards. We would call this bad sportsmanship if this were a sport, but it's even more important than that because, as you point out, we're all Americans. We want our country to succeed, and I just think it's really not. It doesn't help these people who are boycotting the inauguration, and they're not going to be able to change the outcome. So I would say to them, the election's over. Now it's time to come together and govern.
On the Senate side, and for you and for other lawmakers, what happens today after the inauguration? Because all we hear about are the balls tonight and the parade today. Is there going to be any work that gets done in Washington D.C. today?
Yeah, well, the first thing that President Trump will do is sign a number of executive orders rescinding or vacating some of the last-minute executive orders issued by President Obama. President Obama was very busy while he was on his way out the door granting commutations to prisoners and issuing a flurry of executive orders, which has been part of the problem, unfortunately, in the signature of his administration. So President Trump will start unwinding those immediately, and then we'll convene this afternoon, the Senate will, to take up the confirmation of some members of the president's cabinet. When this happened in 2009, after President Obama was sworn in on January the 20th, 7 7 cabinet members were confirmed. And right now the Democrats are saying that they're only going to allow a couple to be confirmed. I hope they reconsider that, because for the same reason these folks who are boycotting the inauguration are dishonoring themselves after a highly competitive election. I just think it doesn't accomplish anything for our Democratic friends, because thanks to Harry Reid and the nuclear option, all of them will be confirmed. All they can do is delay it, and I don't think that serves anybody's interest.
And I know you have to get going to the inauguration, but real quick, can you explain to our listeners how Democrats are able to slow down that confirmation process? As you said, you confirmed, the Senate confirmed so many other Democratic cabinet members under President Obama compared to what Democrats are doing now.
Well, I think some of it is a result of really a surprising outcome in the election. All of the pollsters and the pundits thought that Hillary's going to win, and I don't think it's any surprise that the Trump transition wasn't quite up to speed that you might otherwise expect. Hillary was already measuring the curtains, as you might imagine. But a lot of this is incredibly document intensive. Steve Mnuchin mentioned that he'd had to produce 5,000 documents. He had to have lawyers and accountants help him go through all of his personal finances to root out conflicts of interest and to answer questions from the committee. So a lot of this is just very intensive, the sort of scrutiny and vetting that you would expect for people in high office like Treasury Secretary, Secretary of Defense, and the like. But some of it is more than that, or less than that, I should say. It's really just foot dragging. And so there's nothing to be accomplished. It's just using the Senate rules or doing everything they can to drag their heels to get to expedite the confirmation of this incredible cabinet.
Senator, I know you've got to get going to the inauguration and the all the events. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for getting in touch with us today.
Thanks, Chad. Take care.
Appreciate it. That's U.S. Senator John Cornyn here on the Chad Hasty Show. Every Friday during the 85th Texas legislative session, we're going to be visiting with our good friend Patrick Svitek of the Texas Tribune, find out what's happening down in Austin. Patrick, welcome back. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well.
Thanks for coming on today. It was a not too busy of a week, at least publicly, down in Austin, but that doesn't mean there wasn't quite a bit of news. And one of the big news items is the budget, and 2 competing budgets that it looks like they're pretty far apart, aren't they?
Yeah, so they're nearly $8 billion apart. Just the exact top-line numbers there is the Senate's proposing $213.4 billion over the next 2 years, and the House is proposing $221.3 billion over the next 2 years. Like I said, nearly $8 billion apart. And just for reference, last session, that gap, I believe, was a little under, if not clearly less than about $3 billion. So definitely they're farther apart than they were last session. And there's going to be some, considerable reconciliation between those two figures going on over the next few weeks.
For those who don't know the process of what happens now, because this is the one thing that lawmakers have to get done, what is the process? What happens now between the House and the Senate?
Yeah, so we had the House and Senate put out these 2 budget proposals earlier this week. Those are kind of referred to as the starting point budgets. The House Appropriations Committee, the Senate Finance Committee are going to begin hearings on their budgets. I believe the Senate Committee is scheduled to start working on it right away on Monday or Tuesday next week. So that's going to start very quickly. They're going to put their respective bills, budget bills, to vote in their chambers in the House and Senate, respectively. And then they're going to try to reconcile those 2 budget bills that get passed out of each chamber in a conference committee. And the conference committee will then come up with a kind of consensus bill, a conference bill, and then they'll put that bill to both chambers. And hopefully both chambers will then come to agreement and pass the consensus bill. And then it heads to the governor's desk, and that's where he can veto it, or he can line item veto it. The governor has that power in Texas. And so this is just the beginning of a pretty long and deliberative process.
Do we know if there are any specific items within the budget that lawmakers are maybe on the House or the Senate side, whichever, are going to be really adamant about keeping? Because some things are going to have to go, and some things may have to be added. It just depends on which version they go with. Is there anything that they're adamant about?
Yeah, I would say there definitely is going to be a spirited debate over funding for public education. If you look at these starting point budgets, the House budget is putting more toward education than the Senate is. It's also putting more toward health and human services. Those are a few policy areas where I imagine you're going to see some spirited debate. And I'm sure you'll also see some debate over border security. A lot of lawmakers are saying that they're still waiting to kind of see what happens within the early stages of the Trump presidency before they start making hard decisions about how much money to appropriate to that. In Texas, obviously, for a long time, lawmakers in Texas have been waiting for some kind of fiscal relief from the federal government when it comes to securing the border.
And moving on from the budget, because
Sure.
this is going to be such a long discussion over the budget. And we'll probably talk about it every week. Another issue that we will probably talk about, if not every week, probably at least 2 weeks out of the month, will be the bathroom bill. You had the governor, I know, comment sort of on it yesterday, and you had the House Speaker who, I mean, it just. He's basically said just about everything, but I'm against it, right?
Yeah, so I think the big development in that debate this week was the speech that the House Speaker, Joe Strauss, gave to the Texas Association of Business, which is a group that has adamantly opposed this legislation before it was even released, and right, now that it's released, they're still not pleased with it. And so he was kind of preaching to the choir here, but he said he wants lawmakers to be very careful about passing any legislation that can make the state less competitive economically. He had already said that he does not view this as his most urgent concern of him or his district back home in San Antonio. And that was in response to the idea that it's a priority for the lieutenant governor. And so we all kind of know where he stands on this, but this speech that he gave earlier this week, the Texas Association of Business, I think really crystallized his position. And, as we wrote in our story at the time, it really kind of further brought the battle lines over this bathroom bill into focus. And it's pretty clear that this is something that, at least personally, Speaker Strauss is not a fan of.
When you look at what the governor had to say yesterday, and it's something I mentioned on the show earlier, was if the governor is absolutely for something, normally he'll come out and tell you that he is absolutely for something. To me, it just doesn't seem like SB 6 and the bathroom bill is going to be a big issue for the governor. Are you picking up on that? What do you think?
Yeah, all signs point to the bathroom bill not being a high priority for the governor at this point. I mean, his posture toward this before the bill's release and after the bill's release has basically been to highlight that, at least according to some of the public polling that's been done, that this is a concern to many Texans and that it's a legitimate issue worthy of the legislature's deliberation and attention. But he's not taking a firm position either way yet, and this is relatively characteristic of Abbott on hot button issues. He kind of likes to float above the fray, take a relatively cautious approach, and I'm sure if his hand is forced, he will weigh in a very firm and definitive way. But right now, it's clear that he doesn't view that this is the point in the debate where his voice is needed.
Mug shots are always fun to look at, and we have another one from the Texas House. Dawanna Dukes has been indicted. What is the future? Lay out for our listeners, because I don't know if everyone's up to speed with her and her promise to resign, and she didn't resign. Kind of lay out her storyline right now.
Yeah, so this is something that was not entirely unexpected from people who've been following her legal saga. She had promised to step down on the first day of session. It was already known that she was under legal scrutiny for some allegations regarding to how she used her staff a number of years ago, I believe. And so, this is something that was not entirely unexpected. But she had promised to step down on the first day of the session. She ended up reversing that promise and staying on as a state representative. She was sworn in and everything. And sure enough, several days into the session, she was indicted on these corruption charges. And so it's kind of a messy situation for the Travis County Democrats particularly. There already were a number of Democrats lining up to run for her seat in the event that Governor Abbott called a special election. And so I think there's still going to be a lot of political frustration over her decision to stay on, despite, again, saying that she would step down on that first day of session. And obviously this indictment doesn't make things any easier for her now. No.
So what do we think her future is right now?
Well, in these situations, whenever a lawmaker is facing legal trouble, my kind of measure of thumb is, are members of that lawmakers' party calling on them to step down? Are they publicly expressing any concern? And so far, we haven't seen that. There was a statement from her fellow Travis County Democratic state reps, and they called the situation unfortunate, and they hoped for a quick resolution, but there certainly was no criticism and definitely no call for her to step down. The other day I asked, actually, Speaker Strauss about this, does he have any concerns about her ability to represent her district with this legal cloud hanging over her? And he basically said that's between her and her constituents. So a lot of politicians, and especially Democrats, are just kind of keeping the distance from this, but they're not weighing in a way that I think is going to be politically consequential in the short term.
Very interesting, Patrick. What do we expect to see next week in the legislature, and what stories are you working on today for the Texas Tribune?
Yeah, as I mentioned, next week the Senate's going to begin work on the budget. I think that's going to be one of the big headlines heading into the week. I'm sure we'll very early on start seeing some of the battle lines being drawn over those policy priorities in the different budgets from the two chambers. And then today I'm actually in Washington. I'm here for the inauguration, kind of watching the roles that Texans, both Republicans and Democrats, are going to be playing in the upcoming Trump presidency. Obviously, we have a lot of Republicans who are eager to help implement the agenda, and we have a lot of Democrats in Texas who are trying to find their way and trying to figure out what role politically they're going to be playing in either opposing or carefully working with the Trump administration.
Have you seen any protesters yet?
Not yet. I haven't left my apartment yet, though.
Well, take the gas mask just in case, okay?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for the advice.
Patrick, thanks for talking with us today. We'll visit with you next week, and hope everything goes well in Washington for you this week.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend.
All right. That's Patrick Svitek, Texas Tribune.